For a year, we followed the story of a God who pursues. From the beginning, through promise and failure, exile and hope, a God who never stopped moving toward us. This is the moment we respond to God's wisdom. For the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So, we begin here with humility, with prayers, with hunger for God, as we choose to pursue the one who first pursued us with our whole lives. This is our pursuit of Him.
Well, this morning I want to talk about something that I think about but would hardly dare to speak. Probably something that you think, but you never really talk about it. And it's this, that sometimes God can answer our prayer, and yet we still don't feel satisfied. It's the fact that sometimes in life we can feel blessed, that God has done something, yet we can be bothered still at the same time, that we can pursue something, and God can move, and for a moment it feels really good, and then weirdly enough, the emptiness sets in. And there's a phrase that we sometimes use, and we speak often more under our breath, but it's the simple phrase sometimes, what was the point? What was the point of that? That you may have gone to school, invested years of your life pursuing maybe a dream, and then you've ended up in a career that had nothing to do with the schooling you had, and you wonder, what was the point of that? Or maybe you moved here from another country and you thought life was going to be very different, and you found that it's been more struggle than you ever expected, and you wondered, like, what's the point of that? Or maybe you retired, or maybe your spouse retired, and just about a month after they retired, they lost their life. They passed away. They had a heart attack. And you had all these dreams of retirement, and you wonder, what was the point of all that saving and all of that work? Over and over, there is a refrain, and whether or not you are a professor or a lawyer, or whether or not you are rich or poor, whether or not you are influential or you are a soccer mom, we all ask that question at one time or another. What's the point? And what I always find amazing about the Bible is that it speaks and addresses these questions that you and I have. And there's a whole book given to us in the Bible that talks to us about the point of life, what the value and meaning of life really is. So I invite you to turn there this morning. It's a little book of Ecclesiastes. You go halfway into the Bible and then turn a little bit more towards the New Testament. 12 chapters that really are written to address this problem. What is the point? Where do we find meaning and value in life? And as Sawyer said, we spent last year giving an overview of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, looking at God's pursuit of us. And then after we kind of did the narrative, we've come back to the central section of the Bible, this kind of called wisdom literature, and looking at what these books have to say about us growing in our relation with God and pursuing God. And we saw through the book of Job what it is to pursue God even in the midst of pain or the lowest parts of life. In Psalms, pursuing God with our emotions. And Proverbs is pursuing God with our minds. We saw last week Song of Solomon, pursuing God with our heart. And is He the ultimate great love? And then we get to this little book of Ecclesiastes. And here in Ecclesiastes, Solomon's going to write about finding value and meaning in life, particularly when things are good. You have Job, who's like, what's the point when there is suffering? And then we have Ecclesiastes, the other end of the spectrum. What's the point when life seems actually pretty good? And what Solomon is going to remind us of is that life under the sun, life just here on earth, does not make sense unless we know the one who is over the sun. Solomon is the author of Ecclesiastes. Solomon lived about 900 or so BC. He was the third king of Israel. He's the son of David. And Solomon is like a whole bunch of people wrapped together. Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines. He was the Hugh Hefner of his age. Right? Pursue passion. Every appetite, you met it. He was incredibly brilliant. He was the Einstein and Stephen Hawking of his day. He was incredibly wealthy. He was the Bill Gates of his day. And here you have this guy, Bill Gates, Hugh Hefner, Stephen Hawking, all wrapped up in one package. Isn't that the guy you love to hate? Right? The good-looking, smart, intelligent, rich kid you competed with in high school, and you're like, well, what's the point of me even trying? Look at them. And at the end of Ecclesiastes, it's like Solomon, who after all his experience comes and has a conversation with his son and says, let me tell you what really is important in life. And what Solomon does is that he directs us, he tells us that life is meaningless. Then he gives kind of a demonstration of why life is meaningless under the sun. And then he ends with, where do you and I really find meaning? And the challenge today is we all look for meaning in something. We all have a heart that longs for something that we think will give us security, significance. And what Solomon reminds us is it's often the wrong thing. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, beginning at verse 1, it says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And actually, the word there is meaningless. And so here Ecclesiastes open with Solomon kind of describing himself as a preacher. In Hebrew, the word there for teacher is koheleth. The Latin translation is Ecclesiastes. And what Ecclesiastes means is a teacher, but more than just a teacher, it's kind of a gatherer of people to be able to speak to. So Ecclesiastes in our term is an ancient TED Talk. It was a gathering of people who were sharing their wisdom, particularly Solomon. There's Solomon, and then there's kind of a narrator, and saying, here's where the meaning of life is. And in fact, under the sun, everything is meaningless. In fact, 5 times in the opening 2 verses, Solomon says vanity or meaningless. Vanity is something that looks good, but it's empty. It's a vapor. It has no real value. It's meaningless. The word there for meaningless, it's like a raspberry. That's what it's saying. There's no value. It's a burst of air. In Hebrew, the word for meaningless is hevel. It says the world's gone to hevel. You got to be careful how you say that. It's hevel. It's meaningless. Now, you wouldn't want this guy, right, being your social media director, talking about life. But he looks at everything and he says, where do you find meaning or value? And in particular, the opening chapter, what Solomon does is he has kind of this Groundhog Day experience that he talks about the repetition of life. Everything is the same. It's just the same thing over and over and over and over. He goes on in verse 3, what do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The winds blow to the south and goes to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea's not full. To the place where the streams flows, but there they flow again. And all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye, it's never satisfied with seeing, nor the ear ever filled with hearing. What has been will be, and what is done, and what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It's been already in the ages before us. There's no remembrance of former thing, nor will there be any remembrance of later things, yet to be among those who come after. And Solomon just goes, life is just a Groundhog Day. It's just a repetition, the same thing over and over and over. He says, work is the same. Why do you drive 40 minutes to work, 40 minutes back every day, 40 minutes there, 40 minutes back? You fix the same things. You're going through the same motions. You're writing the same deals. You're selling the same things. You're keying the same things into the cash register. You're preaching the same people week after week after week. He says it's just the same. Where do you find meaning? And some may say, but isn't the world become better? Like, look, aren't we better than what we were in ancient times? And Solomon says, nations rise, nations go. Peoples come, people go. The average age of an empire, the average age that it lasts is about 250 years. I don't know what it says about North America. The average age where something has its golden moments, 250 years, then it crumbles. It often crumbles because they can't find meaning. Family doesn't mean anything anymore. Sexual ethics have gone their way. Everything's about money and the individual. And nations come and nations go. And this is the same with nature. The wind just kind of circles around the earth. It goes again and again and again. He says the seasons come and the seasons go. It's just another Groundhog Day. Everything is repetitive. And here, this is like 900 years before Jesus. It's like 3,000 years ago almost. It talks about the whole water cycle. Like the streams run into the ocean, but the ocean isn't filled. Why is that? Because there's evaporation. It goes into the sky, comes back down. Where do you find meaning? He says the eyes never had enough of seeing, like you're always looking for something. Isn't that true? You long for something and you buy it and then you want something more. I mean, you get the newest iPhone or the newest Android and it's good for a moment. Then they tell you about the newer one and you want it. And they tell you have to have granite countertops. So everybody goes and gets granite countertops. Now there's all these other stones that you need to have. Not just granite anymore. And the eye never has enough. Oh, here's the fashion. Here's the clothes. Here's the colors that you need to wear. And you get those and then it moves on. It's all this cycle. Where do you find meaning? Where do you find value? The ear never has enough of hearing, never hears enough. Ever think about this? Like 150 years ago, everybody was excited because there was the Victrola. You know, you had music, sound on a little cylinder and you turn the crank or whatever and you could play music. And then all of a sudden people thought, this is amazing. There were LPs, there were records, you could press wax. And there were 33s, right, and all these different sizes. But then they would scratch. And so people got 8 tracks. Now, I know I'm talking a foreign language to some of you who never grew up with an 8-track, but you had 4 different kind of sections that you could listen to. You didn't have to flip the LP, you just pressed a button, and then someone came out with a cassette. And you could fast forward, you could rewind, you could hit it again. Then all of a sudden there was a CD. And you could program it to play the order of songs that you wanted. You could just go and play any song that you wanted, and then everything went digital. You didn't have to carry the CDs. You should just go anywhere you want. The ear never has enough of hearing. Now what do people want to have? LPs, vinyl. Right, that's how you really listen to music. You can't really hear music as it was meant to be if you don't have it on vinyl. The ear never has enough. It's Groundhog Day over and over and over and over. And people come and go. What's remembered? He says, do you remember generations back and generations future? People are going to forget you. Let me ask you, how many of you know the names of your maternal and paternal great-grandparents? How many of you can name them? What are their names? How about your great-great-grandparents? Generations come. It's a hard part of life. We're going to be forgotten. And Solomon says everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless under the sun. 35 times in Ecclesiastes, he uses this word meaningless. 29 times, he talks about under the sun. Everything on this earth, the things that we can see in the natural realm, if that's all that there is, it is meaningless. And then through the next section of Ecclesiastes, he demonstrates why it is meaningless. And in some ways, it's... I don't know. You know the movie Forrest Gump, and how Forrest says, life is like a box of chocolates, and you pick one. Like some it's good, some it's not good. What Solomon does is he picks through different ideologies or ways that we try to find meaning in life. How do we make sense of all this repetition and Groundhog Day? So the first thing he does is he says, let's go to materialism. Maybe if we just have more or do more, maybe if it's about acquiring and getting things, then I can make sense out of it. And he says in chapter 2, verse 1, I said in my heart, come, now I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this was also vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad and pleasure. What use of it? I searched with my whole heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, how to take hold of folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. And Solomon says, let's just acquire, let's just have stuff. And he says, maybe I just need more friends. Let me acquire more friends. And he gets people, and there's lots of laughter, but then you kind of get tired of your friends. And he says, well, let's have a nice place in the city. Let's have a place that we can really enjoy and go to, and that doesn't seem to do it. It's like, no, I just need some quiet in the country. I just need a little place to get away, maybe a little vineyard, he says. I can make a little wine and enjoy it. But then he goes, and that's too much work. He says, it doesn't matter what you have. Eventually becomes meaningless. There was a study done, this is so fascinating to me, a study done about happiness and money. And basically what it said is that people who have basically their basic needs met are happier. Right? If you don't have your basic needs met, it's hard to really be happy, hard to find joy. He said, but above that, the study said, it didn't matter how much more, it didn't change your happiness. Whether you had just your basic needs met or whether you had way more than your basic needs met, it didn't really matter. You were happy as long as things were there. Solomon says, why are we trying to get more? I wouldn't be surprised. You're like me, you're always thinking, if I had money, what would I buy? If I could just have this, I'm just saving for this. Secondly, he goes not to materialism. He takes another box of chocolates from the assortment of life, and he says, well, maybe it's hedonism. The Hugh Hefner part of him comes out. Maybe if I just enjoy all of the pleasures of life. And he says in verse 8, I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the children of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem, and my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Can you imagine? Whatever my eyes desired, whatever I saw, I bought it. I got it. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was the reward for my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. Behold, it was all vanity and striving after the wind. There was nothing to be gained. He said, maybe it's hedonism. I'm gonna meet every appetite that my body has. So he buys everything he needs. Listens to all the music and pleasure, probably goes on some sex vacation. And pleasure is when our bodily appetites are met, the things that we long for, the bodily appetites, they're met. Happiness is when our circumstances that we desire are met. our pleasures, our circumstances. Joy is a longing that's met. And Solomon says, well, I filled every appetite. I went and I explored everything. It was just never enough. And there's always this law of diminishing returns with pleasure. Once you have some pleasure, then you need a greater hit of pleasure. You need more. You've got to have something different, a newer kind of experience. You're never satisfied. Solomon says, hedonism, pleasure is meaningless. So then he says, maybe the answer is in philosophy. Maybe it's in education, intellect. And so, like in this box of chocolate, he said, maybe I can find meaning in my life if I just answer some of the deeper questions. Maybe if I go to school, if I read more, if I find more books, maybe if I listen to Oprah Winfrey or went to TEDx and heard all these TED Talks, maybe in all the knowledge, it would give me something. Do you know, in the nonfiction parts of a bookstore, in the nonfiction part, what is the largest section? Do you know what the largest section is? Self-help. We have more books on self-help. How do we change ourselves? How do we do that than any other section? And it doesn't give us anything. It hasn't changed. Have we gotten better really in 30 years? Less anxiety, less anxiousness? Do we get along? Less fighting, less division? My favorite book, 2012, I'm not sure if it's still in print. My favorite book, written by a man named Robert Wiseman, which you think, okay, if your last name's Wiseman, you might want to listen. The title of the book is Rip It Up. And Rip It Up is all about ripping up all the self-help books and just living life instead of learning it. He says, rip those up. Doesn't mean anything. It's kind of what Solomon says. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is no more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is no more gain in light than in darkness. He said, I looked at all the philosophy, all the intellect, tried to get all the learning I had, and it didn't give me any of the answers. What's the point? What's the point? So he goes to fatalism. He says, maybe it's all just que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. And he goes into the section in chapter 3 that's often, it was a song that the Byrds recorded back in the 60s. He says, for everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to die. He says, maybe everything is just fixed. Maybe it's just fatal. Maybe just things happen. Maybe there is no meaning. Maybe we aren't even supposed to find meaning. Maybe we just do that, experience it. It's not necessarily nihilism. It's just a reality. We just do what's there. But Solomon in Proverbs 14:12 says there's a way that seems right to man, but in the end it's death. That may look good. Everything may look good, but it just leads to death. So he says that doesn't work. If philosophy doesn't work, if hedonism doesn't work, materialism doesn't give us meaning, fatalism, philosophy doesn't give us meaning, he says maybe it's in capitalism. Maybe it's just making as much money as you can. Maybe it's going out and trying to work hard and make a change and build a business and build something that's good and have something that can be a legacy and maybe that people will have and that will last. If you just do that, maybe it's about capitalism. And then he looks around in chapter 4, verse 4, he says, then I saw that all the toil and all skill and work comes from one place. It comes from a man's envy of his neighbor. That's vanity and a striving after a win. All the people building their business, all the people working hard, sometimes just trying to one-up the Joneses, just trying to be a little bit better. I'm working hard, I'm doing that, I'm making a legacy. No, you're just trying to make your name for yourself. And he says, well, in the end, what's good? And then he goes on and he says, well, what good is it if a man is laboring right? If there's someone who's a capitalistic fool and they're going out and they're building something and they're building it for end, what good is it if a man labors alone, right? Who do they have to give it to? All that hard work, where does it go? It goes to the taxman. It goes back to the government. Someone else takes it and someone squanders it. And then it goes on to kind of a passage that's often read at weddings or we're familiar with. Two are better than one. Right? If you're going to work, if you're going to be capitalistic, then do it with a partner. Do it with somebody else because they have good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. Two can work together. Do that. At least there's companionship and some meaning. And then he says, but better is a cord of 3 strands. 2 is good, but a cord of 3 strands. When the presence of God, the narrator kind of kicks in and says, it's meaningless under the sun unless God is there. A cord of 3 strands in a marriage, in a partnership, that God is there. And he looks and he says, capitalism isn't the answer. And he said, maybe it's just in religion. And religion is trying to do what we can. Religion is trying to please God and appease God and do more and more and more. And maybe trying to impress a deity. And religion is something that's under the sun. It's what we do to make ourselves often feel better about what we think God may want us to do. It's not considering who is really above the sun. And someone says, that's meaningless. And that was part of the whole pursuit, is that sin came into the world through Adam. The system became broken. We became selfish. That we are gripped in a sinful condition. And Soren Kierkegaard, I loved his definition of sin, because sometimes we don't like the word sin. We shouldn't use that. That doesn't go well in our society today. People don't get that. Kierkegaard's definition of sin was simply this: that we find value in something or someone other than God. That what sin is trying to find meaning and value in anything under the sun instead of over the sun. And this is what happens, right? We find meaning in our job, and then we have to retire or our job goes. We find meaning in our home, but we have to keep redecorating and fixing it up and doing more. We find meaning in the cars that we drive or the hobby that we have or the people that we know, and people come and go. And the question, my friends, that Ecclesiastes asks is simply this: why are we trying to use broken things to give us meaning in life? Why do we try to use broken things like hedonism or capitalism? Or why do we try to use philosophy or wisdom or religion to try to fix us? Why do we go back again and again to broken things? What are you using to give meaning in life? And it may sound like, oh, Ecclesiastes, like it's such a downer. But actually at the end, what Solomon does is, you will never find anything meaningful in life under the sun, everything that we can see or experience. You have to look over the sun. And so near the end of the book, he says 3 things about God, the direction for real meaning in life. In Ecclesiastes 7, verse 14, he says, when times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this: God has made the one as well as the other. That God, what Solomon is saying, is sovereign over the good times and the bad times. He's over the high points of life, and he's sovereign over the low. And he says, if you want to find some meaning in life, understand the mystery of the sovereignty of God, that he's greater. He's greater than who we could ever imagine. And friends, this is where Ecclesiastes, you can't read just Job, I don't think, without Ecclesiastes. And you can't read Ecclesiastes without Job. Because Job is what? Where do you find meaning in life when the world just falls apart and it's suffering? Ecclesiastes is where do you find meaning when you've got everything you think is good? And you have to find meaning in both. You have to have something that will give you meaning in the low times and in the good times. Because if everything is about, I just want to be happy, right? Which is the mantra of the day. I just want to be happy. I want my kids to be happy. I want to have joy. No one asks the meaning of life when they're standing in line at Disney World. No one's going, I wonder what the meaning of life really is. They ask the meaning of life when a child dies, or the doctor says it's cancer. But we have to find meaning in both. And Solomon says, it's by trusting God. Friends, the problem is we try to bring God down to our size. When all those things that Solomon picks up is trying to understand God and make God kind of down to our size and make him manageable. And we do this sometimes like, well, explain this to me and make God make sense to me. If God made complete sense to us, we wouldn't trust him. What makes God God is he's so high above. He is so different. This is what he says to Job. Yes, you can try to understand and bring me down to your size, but you actually don't want a God your size, because then you will never know that he's powerful enough to deal with your life. Secondly, what Solomon says, don't just like look at God's sovereignty, be mystified, understand him, dig into the greatness of God. He says, secondly, enjoy the life that God gives you. In Ecclesiastes 11, verse 8, he says, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. The days of darkness is many, but enjoy life. And this is one of the things I think Ecclesiastes reminds us of, that God gives us things. He gives us life. He says, I want you to enjoy it. And friends, so many times I think we miss what God does. I know, as parents, like wonderful parents, there are so many times I wished life away. It's like, oh, I wish they'll be done diapers. I wish they will walk. I wish they'll be in it to talk. I wish they will do this. I wish they will be done school. I wish they would happen. I wish they take this board. I wish they do that. And I look back and I wished a lot of my kids' childhood away. And I bet you have. You've wished a lot of it away. And you're probably going, I need to go, I need to get away, I got to get home, I got to get home before the snow comes. Spend a lot of our times just listening. When's it going to come? Instead of enjoying what God has given. The commute, 40 minutes to work, enjoy it, God says. The repetitiveness of nature, enjoy it. Generations coming and going, enjoy it. The meals that you make day after day, the laundry that you do day after day, the lawn that you mow week after week, the snow that you shovel hourly in this winter. Guys, enjoy it. Enjoy it. And then finally he says, fear the Lord. The end of the matter is this in Ecclesiastes 12. Fear God and keep his commands, for this is the whole duty of man. He says, just fear God. And that, I hope, this is the beginning of the third week of just our prayer and fasting, seeking God, kind of based on growing our fear and understanding of who God is. Our reverence for him, the holiness. He's greater. He can deal with things, that he makes meaning and power. And friends, the most amazing thing is that Jesus stepped into the meaninglessness of this life for you and me. He stepped into this world that was saying, what's the point? Why bother? What should I do? Shepherds and wise men who came to worship Jesus, what's the point of this life? And Jesus stuck with us. He didn't give up on us. He gave us eternal life. He said, in all the hevel, all the meaninglessness, I'm going to give you meaning because my Spirit's going to be in you. Let us pray. We're going to sing a song just about the greatness of God. And I wrote this down because I didn't want to miss a thing. And like church, before we sing, I want us to stop and not just think, I want us to take action. Because Ecclesiastes doesn't ask us just to think about something. Solomon challenges us to repent. He's writing to people who try to live near God, close to God, but love other things just as much. And he says, all that's meaningless. All is meaningless. And some of us are exhausted, frustrated, bored spiritually. We keep blaming our circumstances, right? It's just life is just so busy. What if the problem isn't the things in our life? What if the problem is that we are asking something under the sun to give us only what God can give us? If we're asking some stuff, some pleasure, some money, some people, broken things to give us something that only God can give us. So let me ask, what have you been trusting more than God? What is it you fear losing more than God? And what would devastate you if God took it away? Those tell you where you find meaning and what you value. And this is where repentance and humility begins. Solomon had all of it. In the end, he said, fear God. He didn't say admire God. He didn't say try to manage God, but fear him. Because when God is minimized, everything else becomes big. But when God is magnified, everything else finds its place. So let's stand and worship and sing to the one who is worthy of it all, because he stepped into the meaninglessness of life to give you and I meaning.